Yeah.
He's done.
Welcome, everyone, to Contemporary Issue Sunday School class. Thank you for coming out on July 4 weekend. We're going to have a nice patriotic topic today by Ron, and tell us about what events led to the formation of America. And so a good little history lesson today. Yay! And we've got 25 or 30 folks here. Thank you for turning out.
Surprise.
Is this gonna be real history or the
History. No, everything totally accurate. From Ron Putin, that's right.
all the bad stuff out, so we don't have to get
Oh, okay.
traumatized.
I have a joke first, though. We all went into Fellowship Hall this morning, a little different than our sanctuary, and so you could see all of us going in and looking, where do I sit here? We're in a different place. So, of course, you watch people and they go to the same area that we always do, and that's called deja vu. I heard that one and thought I would share. Okay. Zoomers, thank you for being with us. Please mute yourself in the lower left corner of your screen when you're not speaking. And we are recording this for future playback on YouTube. And
Doug's not
keep
listening.
the date of, the Punings are gonna have a August 31 party at the summer party at their house for our Sunday school class, which they do every summer. We thank you. So August 31. That'll be great. Keep the date. Save the date. Right.
I'm so busy.
Okay, we can talk about news for a minute. Anybody gonna join Elon Musk's new political party, the America Party, that he announced is gonna start? A new independent political party. What, Mary?
Maybe he'll be in the middle.
Maybe he'll be in the middle. That could be.
What makes you
Elon-
think that?
Maybe Elon will be all over the road
Yeah.
in his Tesla.
That's funny.
He'll be on every side, left, right, there.
It could explode.
Steve, would he pay for people to actually join, like pay somebody to vote?
Yeah, sign up for
Yeah.
it.
Be up there.
Yeah.
$1,000 to anyone who wants to join the America's Party.
We know what kind of person you are. It's just the price.
That's where I measured.
It's only
Never
money.
know about Elon, what he's gonna do next. That's right. Any other thoughts on current events want to share? Christine Little is gonna share with us, present about immigration in a few weeks.
Right.
So that will be good. She's gonna tell all about what's going on lately and maybe what we should be doing too. Is that right, Christine?
Right, I thought I'd choose the topic that wasn't very controversial.
Yeah. Not much about immigration in the news lately, of course. Okay, with that, we want to leave plenty of time for Ron to tell us about the history of our great country. So take it away, Ron.
Okay, well, Ron's book sales are always going here. I've written a lot of books most times, but I want to mention a few of them. One of the easier ones to read, it's not so long, is David McCullough's 1776, a bestseller, and it focuses specifically on that pivotal year of 1776, which was when actually the Declaration of Independence was signed. The war, of course, started a year earlier, 1775. So that's a good book. A couple other ones. The British Are Coming by Rick Atkinson. And Steve just informed me that he used to work with this author, Rick. Rick is writing a trilogy on the Revolutionary War. The first of the trilogy was this one here, The British Are Coming. And just in the last month, he released the second book. And we'll see it in one of the slides. But he's planning on doing the whole Revolutionary War in 3 volumes. And the second book is on the top 10 bestsellers list. I noticed this morning's paper. So pretty good reading. There's an Oxford History of the United States series. And you can see how thin they are. But this one covers the period 1763 to 1789. And it's called The Glorious Cause, which is the formation of our country. And this is actually the book I used the most in coming up with this presentation. So let's get started. Let's get the slides up.
Second.
There's even a pretty good cartoon. Yeah, there's also the series of books by Alan Eckert, which are, I won't call them completely historical fiction, but he's got a series of 6 books, 6 of the best books I've ever read. But the one that The Wilderness Empire talks about, particularly the French Indian War, which we will see was really the precipitator of American independence for all practical purposes. Next slide. How many saw this one in the newspaper this week? Anybody? Declaration of Independence. I think we all need a refresher course. Here we go. Next one. There again are the books I mentioned. And the one on the right there, The Fate of the Day, just came out a few weeks ago. And it's already on the bestseller list. And we've got to wait for the 3rd book in that series. Yes.
Are they historical fiction or is it?
No, factual all the way. Factual all the way. How many have seen the movie, The Last of the Mohicans, with Daniel Day-Lewis? Yeah, a really good book. And it is mostly factual. It's got a few fictitious characters in it. Obviously, the Lost Indian tribe, but it's based pretty closely on good history. There's a book, Fort William Henry, and there was a awful slaughter of British soldiers and civilians who, after the surrender at Ticonderoga, were marching out and were attacked by the Indians. So I'll pass that one around. Okay. That's a great movie worth watching. But it really shows what the roots of the American Revolution were. You say, well, now wait a second, what did the French and Indian War have to do with the Revolution? France and Britain were always fighting, it seemed like, in the 1800s. They'd fight for 5, 7, 8 years, have peace for maybe a decade, and then go right back at it. And most European scholars view the North American French Indian War as part of a larger 7-year conflict. So Britain and France were going at it between 1754 and 1763, and that's still a decade and a half before our revolution. But what happened to Britain? The war nearly doubled the British national debt from 75 pounds, I guess it is, million pounds, to 133 million pounds. And the interest payments consumed over half of their national budget.
That sounds familiar.
Yeah.
You're getting there.
And the military presence of the British in North America was a constant drain. They needed to get some funds to pay this crushing debt. And again, the debt had been incurred by their fight with the French. And of course, the fight wasn't just in the North American continent. In fact, the bulk of it was there in Europe. But they were in terrible debt because of war. Next slide. So what did they decide to do? We'll get to that. Pushing a few more movies and stuff. How many have seen on the Turner Classic Movies, Drums Along the Mohawk with Henry Fonda? There's one. Yeah, that depicts the French Indian War, or actually a young couple during the Revolution up there in upper New York. How many have seen Mel Gibson in The Patriot? That touches on the Revolutionary War in the Carolinas, South Carolina in particular. And then how about who's seen the John Adams HBO series? Well worth watching. If you get Netflix, you can watch that one for free. And it is incredibly historically accurate. I was very pleased when I saw it. how accurate they reflected history. Next one. Okay, so again, we get back to the French Indian War and the part of it on the North American continent. And we look into what's the roots of it. Both the British and the French thought they owned the Ohio country. When I say the Ohio country, it is the state of Ohio today, Indiana, parts of Illinois, pieces of Kentucky. And they were contesting who owned and controlled that territory, of course, along with the indigenous Indian tribes. Both European countries used Native American claims to bolster their standing in the Ohio country. The British said that it belonged to the Iroquois, and the French said it belonged to the Hurons. And hence, tremendous fighting there in the Ohio country. Very violent, torturing, death, savage fighting at that time. There's a depiction of what Fort Pitt might have looked like. There were the Monongahela and the Allegheny Rivers meet to form the Ohio at Pittsburgh. There was a fort there, and it was attacked several times by, actually, George Washington was part of an attacking force there before the Revolution. We also want to mention the British 13 colonies feared control of the Pope in North America. So a lot of the contention between the Canadian settlements, which were French and Catholic, and Protestant New England was religious based. Another great book by Alan Eckert, That Dark and Bloody River, that refers to the Ohio. I think there's a song on the banks of the Ohio. Next one. All right, let's step up to, again, we're in the French Indian War. We're at Quebec in September of 1759. There was a tremendous siege that went on as British forces under James Wolfe attacked Quebec, high on the cliffs. It was a battle that killed both of the leaders, both the French defender and the British attacking generals were killed. That's a famous painting there on the lower right of the death of Montcalm. The fighting stopped in 1760 when the French surrendered Montreal and the rest of Canada to the British. And they signed a treaty in 1763. Again, this is still 12, 13 years before the Revolution, where France lost all of its North American lands east of the Mississippi to Britain. Next slide. All righty. Well, the French and Indian War was ended by this treaty. And immediately, Britain realized it was in terrible financial debt. And they thought it's only fair or unfair, depending on your viewpoint, to hit the colonies up to get some money to pay this god-awful debt they incurred. And they said, well, you know, we put our military forces into North America to protect the British colonies. They ought to pay for a big part of it. And that was their thinking. So in 1763, Britain started putting forth a lot of acts and taxes. They first of all set territorial limits. They told the colonists they could not move west of the Appalachians. And of course, that was totally ignored. That was, you know, wishful thinking 100%. And then a year later, 1764, they put in the Sugar Act. This was the start of the taxation. The colonial merchants were taxed when buying sugar, molasses, wines, and coffee, which in that day was quite a bit of your grocery bill. So they got started. Next slide. They kept it going. A year later, they put in the Quartering Act. That did not mean that you cut up a steak in quarters. It meant that they required the colonists to house British soldiers in their homes. And I don't think you were you received any payment. They just would walk into Boston and say, we're sending soldiers in. Clear that upper bedroom and you're gonna house a couple soldiers. So that went over like a lead balloon. Stamp Act, one more year later, placed the tax on legal papers, advertisements, calendars, playing cards, and newspapers. So here come the taxes. A couple years later, the Townshend Act, sometimes called the Revenue Act, placed the tax on glass, paper, paint, lead, and any other foreign items that were not taxed already. So they pretty much covered the bases and put a tax on just about everything they could think of. Of course, there was resistance to that. The writs of assistance were also created, which allowed British officials to search for smuggled items in your home. So they could knock on your door or come in the back door and do a search to see if you had any prohibited items that had snuck through without paying the tax. So things got pretty bad pretty fast there in the 1760s. Next slide. Okay, the Bostonians have always been known as a very independent group of people in Massachusetts colony. And British officials demanded money be raised in the colonies to pay for their royal officials that were living. They planted their high-paid overseers in the colonies for tax collection and snooping and controlling. And of course, expected the colonists to pay the salaries of those guys, which further incensed the colonists. And they started really kicking down. They declared that the New York Assembly, in other words, the colony of New York had its own state government, or it wasn't a state, of course, but a colonial government. And they said, we're going to suspend your New York Assembly until the people fully obeyed the Quartering Act. That meant the New Yorkers were resisting housing British troops for free. And they just said, we're going to get rid of your assembly until you start housing our troops and serving them at least fresh pizza every Saturday night.
Ron,
Uh-huh.
does it kind of sound like the Roman occupation of Israel during Jesus' time?
Yeah, very much so. Pay taxes and send them back to Rome.
Yeah.
So here's a picture of the British General Gage stationed in Boston. And in 1768, again, we're still years in front of the start of the war, 2,000 British troops arrived in Boston to enforce the Townshend Act. And when you consider the population of that town in the 1760s, that's an incredible military occupation. And of course, it energized groups such as the Sons of Liberty and other groups that were really getting incensed and engaged by what was happening. 1770, the Boston Massacre. Deadly clash between British soldiers occurred in March of 1770. British soldiers fired on a Boston crowd, killing 5 and wounding 6. So that increased the tension and inflamed the Bostonians and the folks in Massachusetts even more. Next one. Things kept getting worse. Some colonies began to ban some British imports as a resistance to taxes. In other words, some of the colonists said, okay, if you turkeys are going to tax everything, we'll find a way to, get the goods from elsewhere. Get some corn squeezins from Pennsylvania, or find some
Corn squeeze.
pay for whatever products they can find. Try to find as much local, buy Colorado vegetables, But the British king got so ticked off, he declared, should the colonies decide not to trade with Britain, Great Britain would take care that they would trade with no one else. So the king said, this is George III, we're going to take steps, stop you from doing trade maybe with other nations like France or Spain or other European destinations. So we're gonna control your economy, like put a tariff on or something, you know? And,
Sounds.
so there was a tea act, and of course, the Boston Tea Party occurred in 1773. There's a couple early illustrations of it. The original photographs have all been lost. Okay, then, here comes some more acts. These were the intolerable acts, otherwise known as the coercive acts. 1774, British Parliament passed 4 punitive laws in 1774 to get back at the Bostonians for throwing that tea in the harbor. And it closed the port. With those 2,000 troops plus more, they shut down the port from all commerce and ordered the citizens of Boston to pay for the tea destroyed during the Boston Tea Party. So the flame keeps getting higher and higher. Next one. All right.
So,
We have to throw in this one, parallels of Trump actions to King George. Via tariffs, cutting off trade and severing friendships with other countries. Imposing taxes in the form of tariffs without consent of the people. After all, when you put on a tariff, nobody got to vote on it. Depriving many of trial by jury, pardoning those convicted of juries of penalties, purging legal officials, today going into the Department of Justice, and transporting individuals outside the country for suspected offenses. Interestingly enough, there's a picture of King George in all his regal attire. He's widely remembered now in history for 2 things: losing the American colonies and going mad. Next one. All right. A little observation of British Army soldiers. The officers were usually incredibly well educated and picked from the top cream of British society. You would often, in fact, buy yourself a military position. And it took a lot of political influence, a lot of money usually, and connections to become officers. But the officers were generally high class, very educated people. But the common soldiers, and this is true with I said in all the European wars, the armies for the European wars often were heavily dominated by not middle class artisans, but people drawn from the very poorest dregs of society. The ruffians, the uneducated, Britain went into its slums, the worst slums of Britain, to pull people into the army who were so desperate for joining the army, or the British Navy was the only approach they had. So they were, I'm not going to say all of them were like this, but a very high percentage of the British soldiers were from the dredges of society. And as the war was fought, Middlecoff points it out in understanding the psychology of the British soldiers. A lot of them were just cold-hearted people. And there were a lot of instances in the Revolution where British soldiers bayoneted the wounded and surrendered colonists. Even there in that first conflict, Lexington, Concord, and the early conflicts, they would often just kill the prisoners. Pretty rough. England, of course, found that keeping a large standing army was too expensive, and so they used hired soldiers of fortune, largely from Germany, hence the Hessians. And as you can guess, a lot of the Hessians were desperate men in Germany who couldn't make a living in Germany. And so what do? They become soldiers of fortune. They're not acting out of patriotic love of country. They're acting out of desperation just to survive and for money. And so a lot of the Hessians turned out to be pretty nasty too, and they were prone to committing war crimes, not taking prisoners or treating prisoners well, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. Some of the British military observations. The colonies, of course, were expansive, had a lot of wooded, hilly, swampy, sometimes mountainous terrain, and they didn't support the European mode of fighting as well as some of the European areas. The book also mentions in every colony, the colonists outnumbered the Tories. Who could tell the class what the Tories were?
British land.
Wasn't it supporters of the Britain?
Yeah, and they were not a small number. In some places, they were 20%, maybe even 30%. So by no means were all colonists or Americans, if you want to call them that, united behind the patriotic movement. But they were the dominant. They did have a plurality in all the colonies. There were certainly strong pockets of areas of the colonies that were more under the influences of the Tories.
But a majority of the colonists wanted to be independent.
Yes.
By then.
Yes,
Sons of Liberty.
but the numbers were not as high as you would have hoped. You would have hoped that the numbers would have been, 80% or something, but they were not. Everywhere the British went, they were disliked in general, and the colonists reported their positions, hampered their movements, kind of a parallel to Vietnam, where the people in small hamlets of Vietnam were not friendly to American soldiers to a great extent. The colonies were dominated by Europeans who had fled Europe to avoid poverty, oppression, and control, and they naturally saw the British occupiers and invasion forces as being oppressors and foreigners and get them out of here. And so there was a tremendous, strong undergirding of support to get away from and break away from Britain. Next one. Anybody remember watching Walt Disney as a kid? And remember
Oh, yeah.
Francis Marion, the Swamp Fox? Yeah, particularly, there were a lot of Tories in the coastal area of South Carolina. But as you moved into the hills, some of the roughest, angriest patriots lived in the hills there away from the Piedmont of the Carolinas. And Francis Marion, of course, organized an effective resistance. It was more like a guerrilla warfare approach. And he said his militia often, when they went to get supplies from the surrounding territory, would at least leave receipts when requisitioning goods. They may not have been worth much, but at least they respected the local populace, though, they said. And they won widespread support among the Patriots, sympathetic South Carolinians. Okay, so the war, again, we think of 76 as when the war started. No, Declaration of Independence, 76. But the war started there in the spring of 75. Lexington and Concord, first shots of the war fired. The siege of Boston occurs almost immediately thereafter. Also, a force goes northward, a Patriot force, to capture Fort Ticonderoga. And there's a picture of Ethan Allen's Green Mountain Boys. They surprised the British by moving up and showing up when they didn't expect them. And they captured many dozens of powerful cannon off of Fort Ticonderoga and drug them through the terrible terrain of Maine and on down through New York. Sorry?
In the winter.
It shows winter, yeah. Those are cannons being pulled down from Fort Ticonderoga. There was the Battle of Bunker Hill, which actually was fought on Breed's Hill. And then, of course, the Siege of Quebec, which was an unsuccessful attempt by the colonials to take Canada. Next one.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah.
So the battles of Lexington and Concord were strung out across Massachusetts. On April 19th, 1775. Here's one of the famous pictures depicting that conflict. They were day-long running battles that were fought within towns of Lexington, Concord, Lincoln, Menominee, and Cambridge. And you ask, well, how big were these battles? They were spread out. They were kind of running, walking. They were spread out over a span of 20 miles or more along the roads. Casualties, they said about 73 British soldiers killed, 174 wounded, 26 missing. The American casualties were less, 49 killed, 41 wounded, 5 missing. So the British took the worst of it in terms of casualties, but still compared to the Civil War or other military engagements, not that many deaths. Next one. Okay, shock and awe. Okay, so the war spills over from 75 into 76. And Britain decided, we're going to really shock and awe you guys and show you don't dare mess with the British Empire. So Britain sent 32,000 troops and 125 warships to New York to just terrorize the Patriots and the Continentals into surrendering. There was a battle on Long Island. And the Continental Army was beaten and pushed back there during a fight in Brooklyn. And Washington's army was cornered against the East River there. And as this book clearly proclaims, some feel it was God intervening to save the nation, because Washington was pinned against the East River, which is not a little creek. And they had to try to retreat, and a tremendous fog came in with favorable winds. Battle of Long Island, August 29th and 30. All 9,000 American troops retreated across the East River without a single life lost. And they were covered by that fog. It's night, and even at that, to get 9,000 people in rowboats across that very wide, fast-running East River was a minor miracle. Daybreak, the fog settled and concealed the evacuation, and the British were just stunned. I mean, it was like the transporter machine.
They were gone.
The Star Trek, where'd they go? It was a magnificent escape. 1776, the book again talks about how the independence of our country hung by a thread. We came within a flea flicker of getting destroyed, all the armed forces that first year. There was the Battle of Long Island, Battle of Harlem Heights, which was a small victory. Battle of White Plains was another British victory, and a Battle of Fort Washington. And all those battles were, other than the one in Harlem Heights, were British victories. So things got pretty rough, and 1776 was a survival year, but the British were certainly dominating. Next one. All right, so here it is, 1776. The colonies are getting together, though. And here we come up on the Declaration of Independence. We have the Continental Congress that is convened in Philadelphia. And somebody says the group of men got together and said, we need to write a Declaration of Independence to break away from Britain formally with the document. And 3 people were told to sit down and have a committee to do the first draft. On that committee were Jefferson, Adams, and was it Ben Franklin. And they had a quick talk, and Adams told him, Jefferson, you should write it. You're a Virginian, and a Virginian ought to appear at the head of business. Virginia was the most populous colony, and Virginia was renowned for having a lot of well-educated, intellectual, even collegiate trained men in its leadership positions. And Adams also, here's an honest guy. Adams said, I am obnoxious, suspected, and unpopular. You've got way more charisma. And third reason that Adams gave him, you can write 10 times better than I can, which was true. Now, Jefferson was not a great orator. He did not inspire people with a magnificent voice and great oratory. But when it came to writing, oh, wow. One of the greatest writers in American history. Go ahead, Christine.
No, on 4th of July, I listened to an interview by former conservative Judge Luddick, and he recommended that everyone read the entire Declaration of Independence, and I did. It's not that long. He read it and he gave a kind of an article about it, but so I recommend that everyone really go online and read the Declaration of Independence during this weekend. There's about 27 grievances that are listed. It's all the names of the signatures, those who signed it. It's just inspiring. So,
When in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve so and so.
All righty. Okay, let's move on. Thomas Paine put out the pamphlet Common Sense in January of '76, which was considered a major catalyst in getting the Declaration of Independence writing. And while the Second Continental Congress was debating, Paine's work provided a powerful argument. So Paine had tremendous political influence, and his writings helped a lot. Of course, the Declaration of Independence itself had three basic ideas. It said God made all men equal and gave them rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. 2, the main business of government is to protect those rights. And if a government tries to deny these, a group has the right to break away and become independent. We have to make a note on Thomas Paine. He died of pneumonia, 1809 in New York City. He was relatively isolated and impoverished at the time of his death, and only 6 people attended his funeral. He had written some material that was pretty critical of Christianity, and I think that ignited a very strong backlash against him. But okay, so the Declaration was introduced on Friday, June 28th, and debate began. They took the weekend off and started the debate on Monday, July 1st. Adams remembered that large passages were cut, irritating Jefferson. So Jefferson's magnificent work was put up there, and here comes this big committee of people, and you would feel that way. Here's my magnificent creation, and there's already people, oh, strike that, I don't like that. Nonetheless, he did mention Jefferson did put a denunciation of slavery in the Declaration, his first draft.
ironic though.
Yeah.
He owned slaves.
Yeah. And yet, if you read his book, I recommend everybody read Thomas Jefferson, Modern Power by John Meacham. This is just a few books you can have in your personal library. I think that's one of them you should have. Meacham's book on both Lincoln and Jefferson. But they cut out the clause that reprobated the enslaving of African inhabitants, and particularly the folks from South Carolina and Georgia didn't like those clauses.
Well, kind of like Jefferson cutting out parts of the Bible he didn't like.
Exactly.
Making his own Bible, remember that?
Yeah.
Jefferson also suggested a motto to go along with the Declaration. Rebellion of tyrants is obedience to God. So there's an interesting one. Let's jump to the next one. Okay, so 1776, there's a fourth quarter rebound by Washington's team.
Yeah.
Battle of Trenton, just the day after Christmas, surprise attack by Washington was a much needed victory to restore the morale of a bunch of the Continental Army. The Battle of Princeton, just a few days after New Year's Eve. I think the British were drunk from the New Year's Eve celebration. They attacked them on January 3rd, and there was another decisive victory. There's a picture of the Molly Pitchers. Some people are not sure there was ever a lady named Molly Pitcher. So many think there were, but they started calling women who showed up on the field of combat to help the men load the cannon or whatever. They started calling them Molly Pitchers. So ladies, you've always had a key role. Valley Forge during the winter of 77, 78, severe shortage of food. And I love Thomas Paine's statements. And I think just about everybody's heard this one. These are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot that will in this crisis shrink from the service of their country. But he that stands by it now deserves the love and thanks of man and woman. So that's relevant to today. I'm reading the book right now on the Battle of Saratoga. We'll try to move real quickly through this. Years 77 and 78. Remember, this is a long war. This is going to stretch over 7 or 8 years. The Battle of Brandywine enabled the British to capture Philadelphia and take control of Philadelphia. And Valley Forge, of course, is just 20, 30 miles out of Philadelphia. And then came a key battle, Saratoga. It was really 2 battles fought about 2 weeks apart. It was a 2-part battle that was fought in central New York. Which horse race is known for Saratoga?
Belmont?
It's one of the Triple Crown races.
Belmont?
I think it's the Belmont Stakes. Yeah, it's run at Saratoga, New York. But it was really a turning point of the war. It was an American victory. It forced a surrender of a British army. And there were 3 of them trying to converge on central New York to take Albany up the Hudson River. But the key thing about this battle was not only they got a British army beaten and had to surrender, but it convinced France to formally recognize the United States and enter as an ally. And that, in my opinion, was as important as anything, maybe the key to winning the war. Germantown, there was another defeat of the Continental Army, and then the Battle of Monmouth. I remember I took a extra credit history class when I was between my 8th and 9th grade year going into high school. And I took a course on European, it was a world history, European history it was called. And I enjoyed it. And I had a revelation that summer as I took the class saying, we would have gotten our butts kicked in the Revolutionary War had France not come to our aid.
Oh, yeah.
They put tremendous aid in our hands. And if they hadn't stepped in, and if they hadn't preoccupied the British, tying up so many British ships and forces over there on the European continent and come to our rescue, it would have been all over. That's just a fact.
Yeah.
So,
Ron, there was a recent new TV series with Michael Douglas as Ben Franklin going to France and getting that support. Anybody wants to look that up?
Yeah.
Michael Douglas TV series.
fantastic. All righty, so 4 more years, 1778 to 81. There were some of the battles, Rhode Island, Savannah, Camden. Notice those first 3 bullets, they're all British victories. Finally, at Kings Mountain, down there in the Carolinas, in October of 1780, Patriot victory. And then Cowpens, decisive Patriot victory there in the South. There's a painting of the Battle of Cowpens, then a battle at Guilford Courthouse, and then finally we move up to 1781. Next slide. Siege of Yorktown. Final battle was won decisively with support of Marquis de Lafayette and the French army and the French navy over the British General Cornwallis. Again, the French were crucial in winning that battle at Yorktown. And there was a silver dollar stamped in the United States. It's worth about, I don't have one. It's worth $1,000 at least. It has Washington and Lafayette on a silver dollar. Be a neat coin to have in your collection, but a little bit pricey. Okay, so there was the famous battle at Yorktown. Who here has been at Yorktown? Anybody? Okay. Yeah. All right. And we'll wrap up. Mark Twain had some thoughts on patriotism. By the way, one of the top selling books right now is the Mark Twain biography that's come out. It's almost 1,000 pages. I've got a copy of it, but it's going to take me at least a couple days to get through it. I'm told there's a lot at the end that's so boring. But he did advocate love of country while criticizing blind faith in government. And he made the statement against Mark Twain, Samuel Clemens, patriotism is supporting your country all the time and your government when it deserves it. He noted the true patriots are often brave and scorned, while the timid join in when it becomes easy to become patriotic. So it takes courage to stand strong when things aren't going well. In fact, sometimes things are going very badly, and that's when the real patriots need to stand up, stay strong, and not succumb. Twain viewed the monarchical patriotism as a dangerous concept where the government tells you what patriotism means. I always say, if you say you love your country, to me that says, okay, it's not how big a flag you put in front of your house, or a belt buckle, or a tie, or how many red colored shirts you can put on. Do you love the people and the land and its institutions? And if you can't say you love your country, but you don't like the people that live in it. When you're dedicated to the people of the country, that's when you're really a patriot. That's Ron's opinion. And then we conclude patriotism means to stand by the country. It does not mean to stand by the president. Ooh, interesting. This comes from
Teddy Roosevelt said that.
Teddy Roosevelt, yeah. And then the final one. Okay, which rock group did this, is in that picture?
Raiders.
Paul Revere and the Raiders. Who was it? Okay. Okay. We wrap up by saying the British lost the war for several reasons. Okay. Yeah. They failed to adapt to the challenges of fighting so far from home and underestimated the impact of France's involvement. At the same time, the ideas of the Enlightenment inspired the Americans to fight for their own government. The British badly estimated the independent thought and character of the people in the colonies, failed to recognize that they were not a bunch of, poverty-stricken yokels who couldn't think. The colonists were, really some hard-thinking, patriotic people that didn't want to be pushed around by a monarch living across the ocean. So I've talked too much. Let's get some comments on the Declaration of Independence or your thoughts on patriotism.
Interesting that Teddy Roosevelt would say that.
Yeah, it is. I didn't
Yeah.
know that.
A president would say, you don't owe your loyalty to me, but to the country. Sorry, Alan?
Wasn't one of the battle cries was, taxation without representation? Wasn't that a catalyst
Absolutely,
during,
absolutely.
particularly during the Boston Tea Party on that?
Don't tread on me.
Gadsden. What? Gadsden flag. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
What are some other thoughts in terms of patriotism? What What inspires patriotism in you? What do you see as the key elements of patriotism? Biggest fireworks show?
Well,
Heritage Park?
Ron, I think people who stormed the Capitol on January 6th thought that they were, supporting the government and making change, and I mean, isn't it all in the beholder's eye, sort of? I mean,
Okay.
yeah.
Yep, they were deceived though by the facts were not there. There was no evidence of any of the election having been.
Yeah, but they thought we'd gone way off the rails and they were gonna take the country back to the original ideals.
And just one last thing, I do think that the current administration is trying to change that narrative about what happened with January 6th.
Mhm.
And I was told by someone who is of the opposing party that I am, Nancy Pelosi, now the FBI is gonna try to make a case that Nancy Pelosi didn't call in the National Guard.
Oh,
So, yeah,
she
it's,
didn't.
it's constantly ongoing.
But so what? They weren't, I'm supposed to be there to begin with.
Yeah.
It's still against the law.
Right, Christine?
I've had this conversation, this is what's going on with blaming Nancy Pelosi. Pelosi is not the one that is in charge of the National Guard. It's the president. Since there's no state, a governor would normally call in the National Guard,
Yeah,
but
it's not a
Washington DC
state.
is not a state. So we didn't have anything, so that fell to the president. And for them to say the president was cowering because Nancy Pelosi didn't want to call in the National Guard, it just doesn't make any sense. We have on record that she was begging, not only she, but Mitch McConnell and all of them were begging for the National Guard.
Mm.
I don't think that the president ever did call in the National Guard. I think it was maybe Vice President Pence. Somebody finally did, but for a long time there wasn't. So to blame it on her, who, if anything, it would have been maybe the head of the Capitol Police that would have been contacted. But it was not
Yeah.
her authority to call in she's the Speaker of the House. Or Mitch McConnell, who was the head of the Senate. It makes no sense to say that, to blame her. When it was not in her power anyway to do that.
Oh, it's not. her.
Excellent. Go ahead.
There's been a time of history which some of you may remember during World War II, when our patriotism was tested, and particularly with the Japanese Americans
Yeah.
that
Yes.
were entering into the relocation camp. And the US government actually went to those camps and asked for volunteers to go fight in Europe against the Germans. And my father was actually asked to be one of those volunteers. So you can imagine the dilemma that a lot of these young men had, their families were actually behind barbed wire, were American citizens and living and had to give up their entire livelihood to be in these relocation camps. But yet the US government said, oh, to get out of the camps, would you mind risking your life and go fight for America against Nazi Germany?
Yeah, particularly in the Japanese American unit in Italy won innumerable awards for valor, bravery, and they suffered tremendous casualties.
442nd.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Alan, for sharing.
Yes.
Yeah.
I want to build on Alan's important point. I just had the privilege of chatting last week with Marge Tanawaki, who was a child in one of those internment camps in California. She's a producer now with one of our radio stations here. A lovely lady, had a wonderful chat with her. She's now in her 80s. And to build on that point, I believe patriotism in the best sense of it includes diversity, equity, and inclusion. If we truly do that, we will be patriots supporting all of our colleagues.
Patriotism means you love all the people,
All the people.
not just your select little tribe.
That's what I continue to work on, as do other friends here, on so-called DEI initiatives, diversity, equity, inclusion. We have to speak out boldly and to continue to do that.
And that language is actually in the Constitution or the Declaration.
Similar terms are there.
Similar terms, yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Vicki.
Oh, I think that for me, patriotism has always been a gleaned thing that I have grown up with, looking back to the history of our country. And I've kind of, I feel patriotic when I see the people in my past that have done the work to be patriotic. And until now, when there's something that we can do, like inclusive, all of that, then I feel like I can kind of form my own patriotism. But prior to this, I think I've just held those people that were patriotic in high esteem. Like when I would hear stories of men that would come back from battle, or when I heard stories of women who would leave their children to go work in the factories, during the wars, or when I would see veterans take their hats off in a parade and cry, I would feel their patriotism, but I never claimed it as my own until now, when I know there's something I can do, and I just think, we've come up in a pretty peaceful era of living. I think when I look back in my life, I haven't really had to experience. I mean, I remember being a kid and getting underneath my desk in like the 5th or 6th grade for a civil defense thing. But did I really know what that was about? No, had no clue what that was about. I've heard about it, I've learned about it, but have I ever really lived in the fear of that? No. So I just have always had such an awe and respect for those people that existed during the time of that. So, it's not self-owned. It's because I learned it from my past.
I'm gonna give a plug to, in our bookshelf over there, we've got Liz Cheney's Oath and Honor. And I think that's one of the most patriotic books, from a patriot. And that's available for anybody who wants to take a copy home and read it. So with that,
We've got just a couple more minutes. I want to give our Zoomers a chance. Doug, if you want to say anything about patriotism or the Revolutionary War, or Jackie or Joe, feel free as we're wrapping up here. That's okay.
I thought Ron did an excellent job. I just want to commend him on that.
Oh, thank you, Doug. I want to ask a quick question of our anthropologist today. Is patriotism around the world kind of the same feeling that it is in America, Peter? Do people in
I'm not
Africa?
an expert on patriotism around the world, but the people I've had the privilege of working with, they have, feelings of identity and support for their communities. That's the way I would, and could that sometimes be labeled patriotism? I think so.
But like in Nigeria or something in Africa, do they have more allegiance to their own tribe or to their country?
Those things,
Which is it?
often to the tribe.
Often to the tribe first.
But those
and then the
feelings of
country.
identity and communal spirit, that's how it plays out. I think it's
Okay.
most cultures,
Okay,
most viable cultures.
that makes sense. Thank you. Very good.
Thank
Okay.
you, Ron.
Thank you, Ron. Next week, our guest is an ER doctor. And she's the daughter of Steve and Rebecca O'Neill in our class. And so we're going to talk about emergency medicine and what it is today. So it should be interesting. Yeah. Okay. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
So,